The Victims by Isidore Okpewho. About Isidore Okpewho, 1941 to 2016. Isidore Chukwudoziaganer Hul Okpewho, foremost scholar of African oral literature, was an award-winning novelist, distinguished academic, and devoted husband and father. Okpewho was the author of 5 scholarly monographs for novels, numerous articles and book chapters, and was the editor of over half a dozen anthologies. For his monumental contributions, he was the recipient of prestigious awards such as the Nigerian National Order of Merit and NOM, the Guggenheim Fellowship, the ALAS Vonlin Nichols Award, and many other international honors. Okpewho was the epitome of a man of letters, for both his scholarship and fictional works are deep examinations of the African human condition, and combine expert analysis with shrewd acumen and a sophisticated knowledge of African literary traditions. He was the fine example of the scholar as an artist, or vice versa, as he eloquently argued in his important inaugural lecture, The Portrait of an Artist as a Scholar, delivered at the University of Ibadan in 1989, his first scholarly installments, The Epic in Africa, Towards a Poetics of Oral Performance 1979, and Myth in Africa, A Study of its Aesthetics and Cultural Relevance 1983, constitute groundbreaking works in African oral literature, and established him as a legend in the field, recognized by his peers as an organized and poised leader. He served as president of the International Society of Oral Literature in Africa, ISOLA, from 2002 to 2006. He was also an accomplished fiction writer whose third novel, Tides, won the British Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Africa. His last novel, Call Me by My Rightful Name, 2004, testifies to Okpewho's deep knowledge of the African diaspora and bridges his artistic persona with his scholarship in its sophisticated analysis of the legacies of slavery both in the Americas and in Africa. Many do not know that Okpewho was also a poet and even tried his hand at filmmaking. He was born on November 9, 1941 in the town of Agbar in the Delta State of Nigeria to David Okpewho and Regina Addo. Both his parents were from Delta State, but of different ethnicities. His father was Urhobo and his mother was Igbo. He spent most of his childhood in his mother's hometown of Asaba in the Igbo-speaking part of the state, where he attended St. Patrick's College. He later moved to Ibadan and attended Government College, which was then part of the University of London, graduating with a BA in Classics, first-class honors in 1964. It was in Ibadan that he met the legendary poet and playwright J.P. Clark, whose work would later influence Okpewho's scholarship. In fact, Clark's translation of the Ozidi Saga 1977 inspired Okpewho's last scholarly book, Blood on the Tides, the Ozidi Saga and Oral Epic Narratology 2014. Okpewho worked briefly at Longman Publishers, where he also published his first novel, The Victims 1970. He was then admitted to the University of Denver, where he received a Ph.D. in comparative literature in 1976. He also received a D.Litt. in humanities from the University of London in 2000. From 1974 to 1976, Okpewho taught at SUNY Buffalo. In 1976, he returned to Nigeria and taught at the University of Ibadan, where he served as Associate Dean of Graduate Studies from 1979 to 1981, and chaired the English Department from 1987 to 1990. After a brief stint at Harvard University, Okpewho joined the faculty of SUNY Binghamton and served as Chair of Africana Studies from 1991 to 1997. In 2004, he was recognized with a SUNY Distinguished Professorship in Humanities. Okpewho retired from teaching recently and passed away on September 4, 2016 in Binghamton, NY. He is survived by Mary, his wife of 42 years, their 4 children, and 7 grandchildren. Novels by Okpewho. Call Me by My Rightful Name, Trenton, Africa World Press, 2004. Tides, London, Longman, 1993. The Last Duty, London, Longman, 1981. The Victims, London, Longman, 1970. American editions, Garden City, Doubleday Anchor, 1971, Washington, D.C., Three Continents, 1980. He has been described as one of the most brilliant men of his generation, and one of Nigeria's most iconic literary figures. Summary of the victims. To wives in Ozala, Obanyo Ozoma was a driver and a patient man at home. He lived in the village of Ozala with his first wife, Nwabunor, and their young son, Ubaka. For 9 years after Ubaka was born, Nwabunor could not have another child. Worried and pushed by his family, Obanyo's mother urged him to take a second wife. So, he married Ogugua, a spirited young woman who had been a mother at 17 to twin daughters, Ndidi and Oko, by another man. Ogugua came from the same village as Obanyo. Nwabunor was from Aji, a nearby town. The family home was small, only 2 rooms. When Ogugua arrived, Nwabunor insisted she would not be pushed out of her place. Before Ogugua moved in, Nwabunor had even carried her bed and belongings into Obanyo's room to make her position clear. Ogugua and her twin girls took the other room. Not long after settling in, Ogugua herself became pregnant. A few months later she gave birth to a baby boy, whom they named Bomboy. Then, about a year after that, Nwabunor suffered a miscarriage. The loss made her bitter and suspicious of Ogugua. She thought Ogugua had stolen her chance at another child. Worse still, Obanyo seemed to favor Ogugua and her children. Nwabunor began to feel life was no longer fair. Despite living under the same roof, the 2 wives kept mostly to themselves. Nwabunor sold goods and wares each day to support Ubaka, while Ogugua took in sewing and tailoring work. Neither woman interfered with the other. They even stopped cooking shared meals. Each earned just enough to feed herself and her children. In the evenings, however, Nwabunor and Ogugua would argue or fight out of earshot, and their quarrels echoed through the walls. Eventually, neighbors grew used to hearing shouting from the little house. Nwabunor was proud and stubborn. She refused to be regarded as second just because Ogugua was younger and had a baby too. Ogugua was proud as well, tired of always being Nwabunor's rival and feeling blamed. Both felt trapped by the situation. Nwojide, Obanyo's stern mother, lived with them and preferred Nwabunor to Ogugua. Whenever the wives quarreled loudly, Nwojide would intervene. She often had to separate them before things turned violent. She scolded Ogugua for mocking Nwabunor and scolded Nwabunor for provoking Ogugua. But Nwojide was fair. She cared most about her son Obanyo's household running smoothly. The tension in the home grew day by day. In the early nights, Bomboy the baby smiled with Ubaka or sang with his sisters. But, as the crying children slept and only Nwabunor and Ogugua remained awake, the silence in the house turned to conflict. Tensions and jealousy. As the months passed, the rivalry deepened. Nothing Obanyo did escaped their complaints. Money from Obanyo stopped coming in. He no longer brought home his wages. Instead, he disappeared on long errands. By evening he was often at the village bar, drinking palm wine or beer with his friend Nwans, the town crier. Nwans had known Obanyo before the second marriage and was glad to have him at the tavern every night. Obanyo found the bar more peaceful than his own home. The bar woman greeted him kindly, and he could laugh and talk without having to give anyone money. At home, Nwabunor had grown tired and resentful. She still sold cloth and pots along the main road every day. When she returned in the evening, she would find Ogugua and the twins playing in the yard. Ubaka sometimes helped buy things or carry water, but often he fled inside when the women began to shout. Nwabunor no longer cooked. Ogugua would cook a meal only for her daughters and Bomboy. Ubaka often watched with hunger, but Ogugua told him that his own mother did not need his father's money, so he could wait. Neither wife wanted to give the other the satisfaction of feeding the rival's children. The fights between Nwabunor and Obanyo became brutal. One morning, after the children were gone to school and the twins off to the neighbor's house, a furious Nwabunor ripped a strip off Obanyo's work uniform. He had been about to leave early for his driving job. Ogugua turned and struck her. Nwabunor cried out, but they were alone. She fell fainting to the dust. When the neighbors heard her screams, they pulled Ogugua away and carried Nwabunor to sit on a stool. Ogugua ordered a local man, Nwosisi the doctor, an untrained village aide, to tend to Nwabunor. Nwosisi gave her water and told Ogugua to make soft pap and akara bean cakes for the bleeding woman. Ogugua obeyed, but she waited to feed Boy and the twins first, leaving Ubaka hungry. Only then did Ogugua put down a bowl of porridge in front of Nwabunor. That night, Ogugua arrived at work 2 hours late. His boss at Umukoro and Sons Transport, an impatient man, had already warned him about wasting time. Ogugua had reported a load of yams late before, and once broke a truck's side by driving drunk. Now the boss shouted, "If you're not in shape to drive, we have others who are." Ogugua simply nodded and went to work. He tried to hurry and make up time, but a few hours later, he fell asleep at the wheel on the ferry that crossed the lagoon. The load of yams rolled off the truck and fell into the water. The ferry workers alerted Ogugua's boss. The very next day, without a second warning, Ogugua was sacked. He found himself on the road with only the small severance pay from 1 month's work. He packed that money and went straight to the village bar. Back home, Nwabunor patched Nwabunor up as best she could. She sat by her daughter-in-law's side and scolded Ogugua for hurting her. "Leave this place in shame if you can," Nwabunor snapped at Ogugua. "We will see how you will live without this family's help." But Ogugua held her tongue for a moment. Nwabunor lay pale under the dim kerosene lamp, angry that Nwabunor had sided with Ogugua for a moment. The daily bills, especially Ubaka's school fees, were piling up. One afternoon after the uniform fight, Nwabunor and Ogugua had another terrible argument. Nwabunor, wrapped in a thin wrapper and still feeling weak, confronted Ogugua again about Ubaka's fees. Standing over him in the dim light, she panted and cried, you will have to kill me, but you must pay your son's fees." She spat in anger as tears formed in her eyes. Ogugua answered at once. He spat back toward her and hissed, "Did you think you could force the money out of me? I have told you before and ... I have no money." He was almost mocking in his tone. Nwabunor's eyes filled with fear and fury. "You will kill me first," she cried. "But if you push this old mother to her knees again, I swear." She trailed off. Ubaka, sitting by the fire with the twins, knew not to say a word. Ogugua watched from the other side of the yard with a hard smile, delighted to see Nwabunor get the beating she felt was coming. That night, Ogugua did not sleep well. Without steady work, he spent each day at the bar. He slept in the evening, only to wake and drink again. His mother, Nwabunor, worried for him. She gave him old clothes and coins whenever he passed out on her porch. He usually arrived drunk and hung over after sunrise. But by noon, he was gone, already downing bottles in Nwanzi's bar with laughter and loud singing. Loss of employment, without a job as a driver, Ogugua begged the local Catholic mission for any work. The mission was building a small church and compound out by the river. They needed someone to guard the stacked stones and sand during the night. No one else wanted the lonely post, but Ogugua's reputation as a drunk scared them less than his need. So he was hired as the night watchman, carrying a hurricane lantern to sit outside the church foundation until dawn. The first few nights went well. Under the glow of the lantern, Ogugua drank silently and nodded off only once. Each morning, he saw that the stones were still there. But on the fourth night, he fell into a deep sleep. In the darkness, mysterious figures in white robes, the missionaries joked that ghosts of past builders, came and took some of the stones away. When Ogugua woke at dawn, he found empty spaces and fresh tracks. He even missed his own policeman brother and called the missionary for help. The priest was angry. "We warned you, Ozoma. This is your last warning." Ogugua only grunted an apology and returned to the bar. On the next night, Ogugua tried to keep awake with a flask of palm wine. But again he dozed. The lantern fell and broke. In the morning, all the stones were gone. The mission dismissed him at once. He had been given 1 month's pay. Now it was gone too. Once again, without work, he stumbled home, where Nwabunor and Ogugua only snarled at him for his failings. A stranger's deal for Ubaka. While Obanua was losing jobs, a new figure appeared. Odafe Guam was a local politician who often stayed in Ozala when campaigning. He was a handsome, portly man and a bit of a rogue, known for taking mistresses. Odafe had already taken a liking to Ogugua. He arranged to meet her secretly and promised to marry her for marriage went bad. Ogugua, flattered by the attention, agreed. However, she kept it secret from Nwabunor and Nwabunor. To help hide their affair, Odafe devised a plan. Since Ogugua's family was poor, he pretended to be hiring laborers to build a road near the village. He first hired 3 adult workers, but they complained of Odafe's low pay and left. Next, he gathered 20 boys from the neighborhood, including Ubaka, explaining they would help gather buckets of sand from the riverbed for a construction project. The boys would each be paid £3 at the end of the month-long job. Ubaka saw this as a good chance to earn money for school. His father had nothing, and Ubaka's hopes of finishing school were fading. Each day, the boys met Odafe at sunrise. Odafe would chat only with Ubaka and Bomboy, who tagged along to see his father sometimes and quietly wink at Ogugua if she passed by with Ndidi and Ogo. Nwabunor noticed Odafe taking extra interest in her son and daughter-in-law, but she said nothing. Ogugua pretended not to recognize the glances from her own husband, but in truth she enjoyed her secret relationship. 3 weeks into the job, however, Odafe did not return one morning. The hired boys waited for him under the big mango tree. By noon, Odafe's men arrived and handed out only 5 shillings to each boy, claiming he had fled town to campaign elsewhere. Ubaka had worked hard every day, but he would only receive a few pennies. When Ubaka got home, without his promised £3, both wives were furious. Nwabunor snapped, "That shameless man stole your money, not mine." She turned on Ogugua. "See what your lover Odafe has done to our son." Ogugua stiffened. She did not admit her own plans had any connection. Instead, she yelled back, "We have suffered the same. My girls were given less food for this work too." Nwabunor arrived just in time to break up the argument. She berated Odafe when he returned for his feast and sent all the remaining laborers home the next day. But the damage was done. Ubaka, unable to pay even part of his £5 yearly fees, was dropped out of school. Nwabunor was bitter. She knew Ogugua's affair with Odafe had nothing to do with the scam, but Ogugua's proud silence made Nwabunor suspect the worst. Meanwhile, at night, the quarrels at home only got worse. Often Obanua was nowhere to be found. Nwabunor took to waking him at dawn to give him whatever little money remained. Ogugua's twin daughters, Ndidi and Ogo, felt no sympathy for Nwabunor. They began secretly taking food from Nwabunor's side of the yard, especially her stock of sardines and yams. Nwabunor nearly starved 1 week and kept money tucked under her pillow, but it always seemed to vanish. The final quarrel. One scorching afternoon, Nwabunor returned from town just in time to see Ndidi and Ogo fighting over 3 tins of sardines. They had stolen them from Nwabunor's stall. The twins grabbed at the cans, spilling oil everywhere. By the time Nwabunor pulled them apart, the cans lay empty. Nwabunor stormed back from the marketplace, furious. "My savings?" she yelled, shaking her fist. Ogugua stood by and said nothing. The truth came out. It was her girls who were responsible, but Nwabunor only saw Ogugua's silent approval of her own children's greed. In a flash, Nwabunor lunged at Ogugua. They rolled on the dusty yard, hair tugging and fists swinging. Ndidi and Ogo began to cry. Nwabunor screamed and dragged them away. She shoved Nwabunor back by the shoulder. Ogugua leapt up and grabbed a heavy stick from the cooking fire. In the heat of the moment, she struck Nwabunor's bare back hard. Nwabunor collapsed, Unconscious, onto the stones, the twins clung to Nwabunor and howled. Bomboy, in Ogugwa's arms, sensed something terrible had happened. Ogbanua came stumbling out of the bar that moment. He saw Nwabunor's body on the ground and rushed in. He picked her up, but she was limp and breathing weakly. Nwabunor ordered Nwosisi to help, and with neighbors' help, they carried Nwabunor indoors. Ogbanua, shocked at the scene, suddenly ran off yelling her name. He had no more money to spend. Nwabunor knew she had to do something drastic. In the quiet hours after midnight, Nwabunor lay on straw mats in Nwabunor's hut. Her heart pounded with pain and rage. Nwabunor knelt beside her with a kerosene lamp. "Child," she said softly, "you must rest. Tomorrow, I will take you back to Aji, your home, so you can recover." But Nwabunor refused to be told what to do. She sat up and glared at Nwabunor. "No," she cried, "I will not leave my place. I will not give up. They think I will run away. They will see." Nwabunor hung her head. In the darkness, Nwabunor made a decision. She needed power beyond what her jealous heart had known. She whispered back, "You call on your God. I will call on mine." With that, Nwabunor got up unsteadily. Nwabunor went to bed in shock. Outside, Nwabunor slipped quietly into the night. She walked east towards the old road out of town, guided by a flickering lantern. By midnight, Nwabunor had arrived at the village of Nwabunor. There was one person here who dealt in such dark work, a fearsome herbalist known as Nwabunor, a hunchbacked woman who was said to brew poisons. Nwabunor knocked thrice on the wooden door of a thatched hut. An old crone answered with a bitter grin. Nwabunor pleaded for a potion. The old woman eyed her fiercely. "You must pay well," she croaked. Nwabunor gave all the shillings she had collected as rent and a small pouch of coal and nuts. In return, Nwabunor gave her a vial of black powder. "Use it well," the herbalist hissed. "It leaves no pain. But remember, once it kills, it will bring your family together in sorrow." Nwabunor wrapped the vial in cloth and crept back towards home, fueled by a terrible calm. She slipped under the window and into the dark house. Ogugua and the twins were fast asleep. Ubaka, staying awake for some reason, sat reading by the light of a small lamp. Bomboy was asleep in his cradle. Nwabunor tiptoed into the kitchen area. The large iron pot of soup was still simmering on the fire from supper. She poured in the dark powder and stirred well. Then she placed the pot back exactly where Ogugua would find it. She stood there for a moment, listening to the crackling fire and the snores from the main room. Outside, the night was still, poison in the kitchen. Before leaving, Nwabunor hid behind a post. She wanted to see what would happen. Minutes ticked by. Ogugwa's broad shoulders were nowhere to be seen. He had returned to the city. The only people awake were Ubaka and Ogugwa's children. Ubaka, hearing footsteps in the kitchen, wondered what his father's food was. Then he saw Bomboy tugging at his mother's clothes. "Mama," Bomboy whined, "I'm hungry. I want to eat." Ogugwa stirred. "Your sisters," Ogugwa said, pointing to Ndidi and Ogo sleeping at her feet. "Eat first. Come here. Mama is cooking. Sit down quietly." Ogugwa placed Bomboy next to her other two daughters on the mat. "Here," she said, ladling a large scoop of soup onto all their plates. "This is your supper." Ndidi and Ogo began eating with the wooden spoons. Ogugwa tapped Bomboy on the back and fed him carefully. Ubaka crept into the kitchen at that moment. He was surprised Ogugwa was feeding his half-brother Bomboy the same soup. But his mother was asleep out the back, and his father was working late. He had played outside and got hungry himself. Odaif's promise of school money was broken. Ubaka decided he needed a little help. He walked quietly toward Bomboy, carrying a small calabash of water. Bomboy had let go of his spoon to pat his belly. Ubaka sat down beside Bomboy, from behind. None of the mothers saw him. In a quick move, Ubaka dipped Bomboy's spoon into his own bowl and brought it to his mouth. The soup was hot and rich. At that instant, Ogugwa looked up. "Ubaka," What are you doing?" she cried. Panicked, Ubaka froze. Bomboy coughed. He had also tasted the soup. Ogugua shrieked and threw down her ladle. "Poison," she gasped, dropping to her knees. "You have been poisoned." By this time, all three children screamed in pain. Nwabunor, still hiding, heard the shrieks and fled out the back. She ran into the night, crying softly. "It's done," she whispered to herself. Morning came abruptly. The twin girls and Bomboy lay unconscious on the floor. Ogugua clutched her belly, crying out that her insides were burning. Outside, Ubaka staggered from the house. He could barely walk, cold sweat covered him. "Mama, Mama," he cried, stumbling toward the stream. He barely made it to the water and collapsed there, curled up and whimpering. A passing neighbor found him and shouted. By the time Nwabunor arrived, Ogugua and her daughters had stopped crying and were pale and still. A few yellows of bruises showed where Nwabunor had scratched at them as they fell. Ogugua, arriving at home now that night had passed, fainted at the sight of all these bodies. The women of the village gathered around the two small bodies on the floor. Nosisi checked their pulses. All were dead. He gave a single prayer. Bomboy's body was limp in Ogugua's arms. Ogugua cried out, "My children." Nwabunor herself wept. Ubaka lay nearly motionless under the mango tree. By noon, his fever broke. He screamed, blood already in his mouth. They laid him on Nwabunor's straw mat and called for help. It was too late. Soon Ubaka, the last of their line, also died. The tragic outcome: only Ogugua and Nwabunor survived. That morning in Ozala, Ogugua, who had spent the night drunkenly asleep at the tavern, was called home by frantic neighbors. He arrived to find screaming and chaos. On the threshold of the house, Nwabunor met him with the dead Bomboy in her arms. Ogugwa's blood ran cold. "My son," he wailed. He took Bomboy's limp body and cradled him on his lap. Then Nwabunor pointed to the open door. Inside, Ogugua and the twins lay motionless on the mat. "They are all dead," she said softly. Ogugua spun around. His heart gave out at the sight. He stumbled and crushed Bomboy closer to him. Nwabunor was gone. After dodging Ogugwa's slap, she had slipped out into the night. Nwabunor searched the neighborhood but found no trace of her. Later it was whispered that Nwabunor had returned to her parents' town of Aji, leaving Ozala forever. By evening, all the bodies were carried to the forest at the village edge for burial. Nwabunor, with borrowed arms, carried Bomboy's small coffin to the gravesite. Ogugua remained by the bar most of that day, in a kind of shock. When Nwabunor brought Bomboy's coffin to him there, he looked at his own hands holding his son's child. For a moment, he was utterly still. The neighbors watched. Then Ogugua put down the coffin, stood, and walked away. By nightfall, he was back at his stool at the tavern, empty bottle in hand. Only the moon and stars watched over the ruined home. In the end, the house that had held two wives and many children had only empty silence. Nwabunor, the proud first wife, was gone beyond help. Ubaka, the devoted son, and the three children of the second wife, Ndidi, Ogo, and Bomboy, were all dead. The only living soul left among the victims of that night was Ogugua himself. He sat in his quiet house surrounded by shadows, drinking palm wine once more, too late to change the terrible fate that had fallen on his family.